Good morning. Welcome to the beginning of our MHSA annual retreat and our meeting with the Senate Chair of Ways and Means, Mike Rodrigues. I want to thank Raskin Associates for making this event today possible. Before I introduce the chairman, I would like to say a few words about our annual member retreat. Usually each fall we gather together in a retreat house as a first step in our advocacy planning for the next fiscal year. For reasons too obvious, we cannot do that this year. We felt no one could survive a 7-hour virtual retreat, so instead we've decided on a virtual retreat made up of 4 sessions to consider, reflect, and act in these very perilous times. I know in my 30-some years of professional work related to homelessness, I've seen nothing like our current situation, and I've pretty much heard the same thing from my colleagues. Despite that, we need to stay focused. We are aware of the fact that we're facing an unresolved crisis that is a matter of life and death for unaccompanied adults experiencing homelessness. Having depopulated the shelters means we have a shelter bed deficiency of over 800 beds statewide. The network of permanent supportive housing providers has been clobbered by unexpected costs related to the COVID crisis, and there are insufficient new units to meet the growing demand. And even where there are resources, providers are hampered by the lack of locations, siting, and staffing issues. While the governor's diversion initiative meets a real need for tenants and landlords across the Commonwealth, we know too well that it will not impact to any great extent this year the unaccompanied adults experiencing homelessness that come to us due to failed mental health systems of care, persons experiencing substance use disorder issues, institutional discharges, prison and jail releases, and other non-tenancy related situations. And of course, this all comes at a time of great economic and fiscal uncertainty. This is why we gather. Today, given who our guest is, we decided to open up this session to non-members, and we have over 100 people attending. We welcome you. And if you're interested in learning more about MHSA, I encourage you to contact Caitlin Golden here at the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. The schedule for our retreat is as follows. First, obviously, our session today with Chairman Rodrigues. And then after that, we look at the shelter and public health crisis. We look after that in session 3, the next steps in bringing permanent supportive housing to scale. And finally, session 4, which is transforming the system. Where do we go from here? So with all of that, let us begin today's session. We are very fortunate to have the chair of the Senate Ways and Means with us today. You know, for about a decade in the 90s, I was always after my former state senator in Quincy, Senator Michael Morrissey, for money to address homelessness. Later in 2002, after I was elected to the City Council of the City of Quincy, my first term occurred during an economic downturn and one of the worst budget situations in a very long time. It required incredibly difficult cuts and some very hard choices: school, police, public works, great need, and very few resources. After one particularly painful council session, I bumped into Senator Morrissey, and he said to me with this massive grin on his face, "So, what's it like to be on the other side?" I can say I developed a deeper appreciation for the other side. As advocates, we're very singular in our asks of state officials. We speak on behalf of those we serve with passion, commitment, and with a great deal of zeal. And that's the way it should be. But our guest this morning does not have the luxury of being singular in his perspective. He has the unenviable task of somehow making sense of the whole in a situation where the bottom has fallen out of our fiscal reality and our usual process of budget making. He must struggle to address, as I said before, an unprecedented situation of unlimited need and limited resources. And that's why I'm so grateful that the chair of the Senate Ways and Means, Mike Rodrigues, has taken the time to be with us today, to walk us through the fiscal crisis our state confronts and to listen to some of our concerns. Senator Mike Rodrigues was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate in 2010 and serves the 1st Bristol and Plymouth District, which includes Westport, Fall River, Freetown, Lakeville, Rochester, Somerset, and Swansea. He was appointed as the chair of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, as well as the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Steering and Policy for the 2019-2020 legislative session. And prior to being elected to the Senate, he served 14 years in the House of Representatives, where he chaired a number of committees, including the Committee on Commerce and Labor, and where he also served on the Committee of House Ways and Means. Something that I didn't know about Senator Rodrigues that I found interesting, he was distinguished by the President of Portugal in 2010 with the Medal of Prince Henry the Navigator, which is the highest honor bestowed upon non-citizens of Portugal. Far more important, though, than, these kinds of what I might call website facts are the things that his colleagues and former colleagues have to say about him. It says a lot. He's approachable. He's fair-minded. He never puts his ego ahead of the interests of the people he serves. He's generous. He raises a lot of resources for people in need in the community he serves. We are indeed honored to have with us today the chair of the Senate Ways and Means, Senator Mike Rodrigues. Chairman, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning to you, and good morning to all your members that are out there in Zoom land. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought I'd begin by just giving a lay of the land of where we are and how we got here in terms of the FY21 budget. We are already more than a quarter of the way through fiscal year 21, and as all of you know, we have not put to bed finally the final version of the FY21 budget. We've been operating over a series of a couple interim budgets, the last of which will expire the end of October. And why are we here? We're here because, as Joe said, these are unprecedented times. That when I say we, let me say collectively, and first of all, give a shout out to my partners throughout this whole process. The chairman of the House Committee on Ways and Means, Aaron Michaelwitz, and his whole team at House Ways and Means, and Secretary of Administration of Finance, A&F, Secretary Mike Heffernan, and his whole team over at A&F, that throughout this pandemic crisis situation, we have worked very, very closely with one another, certainly not always agreeing, but committed to, as Joe said, put our egos aside and collectively and collaboratively present to our colleagues and to our members what we think is the best path forward. So how did we get here? And I go back to, I'm gonna go all the way back to February, okay? And actually I'll go back to January. January 20th, Governor Baker filed House 2, as required by the Constitution, his proposed fiscal year 21 budget. He filed it on time. He filed it using what we all collectively agreed was going to be our consensus revenue number. We all agreed that FY21 would contain 2.8% more revenue than FY20. And by the way, FY20 was a damn good year. So we were in pretty good shape financially. We have managed over the course of the last few fiscal years where The Commonwealth's economy, as we all know, was moving along quite well. We were able to bank and put a lot of money away into our rainy day stabilization fund. And as you will hear, we're glad that we did that. So January comes, he files the budget. It begins in House. The House Committee on Ways and Means has the first bite at it. February, as was tradition in the Rodrigues household, my wife and I go away on a February school vacation trip. Getting ready for what's going to be a long budget season. I didn't think it would be 7 months long, but a long budget for FY21. And as we're returning, entering the United States, returning on our trip, I was asked a question: Have you traveled through China, or have you been with anyone that's traveled to China recently? Not knowing what the hell why they were asking me that. Fast forward 3 weeks, on the 10th of March, Governor Baker issues a state of emergency, pretty much shuts down the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We in the legislature shut down the State House for all non-essential personnel, and all hell broke loose. And we entered a period of time in the legislature that is completely unprecedented. We went from 150,000 people in Massachusetts collecting unemployment insurance, unemployed. We were pretty much at full employment, to 1.5 million people collecting unemployment virtually overnight. Our UI administration system was overwhelmed, and it caused all kinds of problems. That's all been worked out. We saw the bottom fall out of our revenues, that with high levels of unemployment, with restaurants closed, with stores closed, with businesses shut down, in one executive order issued by Mayor Marty Walsh of Boston, when he shut down construction sites in Boston, he put 12,000 unionized, highly paid building trades men and women out of work and on the unemployment line with just one order. By the way, these are 12,000 individuals that not only make a lot of money, they spend a lot of money, and they contribute a lot to our economy. The Boston Garden was shut down, Fenway Park was shut also. I mean, all of these economic engines throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been shut down. Once again, Senate Committee, House Committee on Ways and Means, and Secretary Heffernan and A&F, back in April, we convened an economic roundtable where we gathered all of the brightest minds in the Commonwealth, our friends who we use every year as we reach consensus revenue numbers, economists from the left, economists from the right, economists from academia, economists from global financial firms, the Federal Reserve Bank, state treasurer. We convened all of the brightest minds, and we're lucky in Massachusetts, we have a lot of bright minds. And at that time in April, it was forecast that we could expect to see anywhere from a $5 to $6 billion revenue loss for FY21. It was shocking to us. We collectively agreed that we had to put the budget process on hold until we can gather more information and reach a higher level of certainty of a couple things: a higher level of certainty of what the actual revenue could look like for FY21, a higher level of certainty of what this virus is going to do, a higher level of certainty of what the economy, how it's going to rebound, how it's going to come back. So we passed first a 1-month interim budget, then a 3-month interim budget. The legislature then, and we in Ways and Means land, had to take our budget hat off and put our policy hat on, because we had to enact, or we did enact, I think 13 emergency COVID-related pieces of legislation. A legislation that would, one, waive things like waive the 1-week waiting period for those people who are unemployed so they can immediately begin accessing unemployment benefits. Change temporarily the open meeting law requirement so that as our local governments are meeting, they could do so remotely, Same thing with our local nonprofits and our corporate boards, so that these type of Zoom meetings could be considered open and public meetings. We told our permitting. So if you had a local permit, and Joe, you were a local government, so you know a lot of permits come through local municipalities. If you had a local permit that was expiring during the course of this state of emergency, and there's no town hall or city hall for you to go through to renew what happens with that permit? You know, so all of these things we dealt with. And then we suspended our rules in the legislature that would allow us to convene informal sessions beyond August 1st. Go back to 1994, the legislature enacted rules that ceased formal sessions on the second year of a two-year session, the so-called election years, on August 1st, to prevent the legislature from coming back into lame duck sessions to do things that the general public doesn't want us to do, raise taxes, vote ourselves pay raises, whatever the issue would be. We put a halt to that in 1994. This year we suspended that rule, and it was very clear when we suspended the rule that we would come back to formal sessions for three reasons: to finally enact the FY21 budget, to accept any one of the half a dozen conference committees that are still in conference, or to enact any additional COVID-19 related emergency pieces of legislation. We have been working throughout the summer on trying to arrive, at least in our mind, of some sort of certainty around the expected revenues for FY21, around the path of the virus and the economic recovery. We have been watching, like many of you, almost on a daily basis of what's happening down in Washington, D.C. relative to the next economic stimulus bill. And it's mind-boggling that literally every day that we could have a president, whether he's in his hospital bed or not in his hospital bed, tweeting out to the world and going from, let's get this deal done now, to send me a narrow deal, just take care of the airlines, and next thing I want a bigger deal, the biggest deal there is, and so go big or go home. So it's, the latest tweet or the latest information out of DC is that Speaker Pelosi issued today as the drop dead date to plan on any additional federal stimulus dollars coming out of Washington. So we are prepared, and we are not counting on any additional dollars coming out of Washington. 3 weeks ago, we again reconvened, 6 months to the day. We reconvened our economic experts, our same friends, to give an updated forecast for fiscal year 21. The result of which was good news and bad news. The good news is it is now agreed that the fiscal hole for FY21 is more in the world of $3.5 billion, not $5 billion. That's the good news. So $3.5 billion hole versus a $5 billion hole. The bad news is we have a $3.5 billion hole with no federal money that we can count on. Governor Baker last week filed his revised FY21 budget. Many of you have seen it. I think it's a very good document. I think it's one that we in the legislature are going to make better, but it's certainly something we can work upon and build off of. How did he propose filling the $3.5 billion hole? By using a series of one-time fixes. Lots of federal money. The federal government have provided us some relief, primarily through what was known as the CARES Act. Many of our housing shelters and communities received lots of CARES Act money directly, not through the state, but directly to various organizations. We received a lot of money in the state. As you know, there's lots of strings attached to that money, and there's been reinterpretation of how you can spend some of that money. So the $3.5 billion hole, we use about $500 million, $500 million in CARES Act money. In addition to that, the federal government provided a supplemental, we call FMAP, it's Federal Medicare Matching Funds. Traditionally, they pay 50% of qualified Medicaid mass health expenditures. They reimburse us 50%. That's going up to 56%. Significant. That 12% increase on the largest line item in the state's budget amounts to about $800 million of one-time additional revenue that we can count on. And then on the other side of state available funds, the governor dipped into that rainy day account, the so-called Stabilization Fund, to the tune of $1.35 billion. About 40%, he used about 40% of the balance. There's about $3.5 billion in the Stabilization Fund. These are dollars that we have through very, I commend my colleagues through utilizing real fiscal discipline. We saved this money over the last few years when the times were good and for a rainy day, and it's certainly raining today, literally and if not figuratively. And the governor proposed using that to balance his budget. The budget now comes to us in the legislature. We are committed in the next few weeks. There's no timeline. It's important that we get it right rather than rush it. Certainly, the fact that we waited these 7 months since April to do this budget has paid dividends, because I'd much rather be fixing a budget now with a $3.5 billion hole than a budget before with a $5 to $6 billion hole. And we will be beginning in the near future. You can qualify near 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is in the foreseeable future. The House and Senate will be putting to bed fiscal year 21 budget. And then we jump right in December, which is right around the corner. We jump right into fiscal year 22. Particularly when it comes to housing, I can tell you that I am in the process of literally meeting with every one of my Senate colleagues. We're about halfway through the Senate, meeting one-on-one with them in Team Ways and Means. And I think to a member, housing instability is top of their priority list. We know that there was an eviction moratorium. That moratorium has lapsed. We know that Governor Baker has put together a $171 million plan to address the tenants, to address landlords, to address housing shelters. We also know that we've heard from many advocates that it's not enough money. So we've heard all that. We are cognizant of all that, and we will do everything in our powers to ensure there's enough resources in the housing and shelter world. Me personally, I for many years co-chaired the South Coast Network to End Homelessness with our good friend Peter Muse, Kathy Shedler-Clark, Sue Mazzarella, who I hope are on this call, good friends of mine, know how committed I am personally on the homelessness issue. We in the Senate have led in the way of unaccompanied homeless youth, for instance. On these issues have all been Senate initiatives, and the Senate president is very, very, not just sympathetic, but very aware of these issues and committed to doing all we can. But as Joe said at the beginning of this, this pandemic has not just put a stress on housing. It's put a stress on food insecurity. It's put a stress on mental health, put a stress on substance abuse issues. It's put a stress on early intervention, on our Head Start programs. We have so many families today that are trying to deal with the reality of remote learning in so many households, unfortunately, where there is nowhere near the being home is nowhere near the best environment for a young person to learn in, to become educated in. So we're aware of all that. We are. I often say I'm a generalist. That my job is to be a generalist, but have access to specialists like all of you that we're not afraid to tap into. And I'm done rambling for now, Joe. I'm going to take a sip of coffee, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I do have a few questions here that, as you know, we've been trying to summarize up, what we're hearing from our various members for some of these questions. But, and first and foremost, and it's always right from the start, it's always, in my mind, in a budget process, probably the most difficult question, given the pressures faced by both your members and the various interests of their districts. But it is a question we'll hear a great deal. And I just really wanted to ask you this question: has Ways and Means and the Senate, for that matter, they've been giving any thought to other alternate or new sources of revenue to provide greater ability to meet this wide array of need that you've been describing?
Absolutely, nothing is off the table. We have to look at both sides. There's only so many ways to fix a budget hole. And I think the most successful way is a combination of using all the tools that you have. You cannot just cut your way out of a deficit. You cannot just tax your way out of a deficit. You cannot just use one-time funds and help to get your way out of a deficit, whether that one-time use of funds is what you have in a bank account, your savings, your stabilization fund, or federal dollars. And we are looking at any and all options. The governor, he might say he doesn't raise taxes in his proposal, but he does use new tax revenue. How specifically? Scheduled to go into place on January 1st was a charitable tax deduction that the governor proposed suspending that. That right there is $64 million in new revenue. There is a sales tax collection procedural recommendation or proposal that he's put forward called accelerated sales tax. That is about a $280 million source of new revenue for this budget. As far as other broad-based taxes, there's certainly discussion on that, but the question always comes down to who you're going to tax. And everybody, of course, wants to tax the other guy. Don't tax me. Tax the other guy so he pays more taxes. And whether that other guy is corporations or corporate taxes, well, I can tell you that many corporations are not making a lot of money right now, and they're going to be faced with a 60% unemployment insurance tax increase next calendar year for all this unemployment, whether that's so-called capital gains or unearned income, increasing taxes there. Legitimate question, something we'll look at. Once again, we're forecasting much lower capital gains revenue for next fiscal year. We're looking at all that. And we will continue to look at all that. Nothing's off.
You have a committee on committee on revenue that are exploring all these various options.
We do. We led by Senator Hines, who chairs the Revenue Committee, one of my former committees, by the way. He has convened a Senate Revenue Working Group, and they have been looking at this for a few months and will be issuing proposals and their findings to us shortly. Oh, you're muted, Joe.
And they can point that out to me before I went too far. And again, I really wanted to, more on point. There's a real concern among our members, and you've kind of touched on it, to be honest with you, but for really the most vulnerable, and that's the population that doesn't benefit so much from programs like RAF. They really are the disabled, homeless, people on the streets and in shelters, unaccompanied adults in particular, those being discharged from institutions to the streets, those with serious mental illness or substance use disorders. And I was wondering that if you could, and again, within the entirety of the current fiscal situation, can you give us some sense of where this vulnerable population fits into the Senate's consideration?
At the highest priority. As I said, as I meet with every one of my colleagues, I think to the one of them, Democrat or Republicans, to the one of them, to every one of them, the most vulnerable populations, those that need secure housing, those that need a secure source of food, is the top of everyone's list. The safety net programs that we provide is one of the primary responsibilities of government, and it's of the highest priority.
Well, that's great to hear, and I think it's particularly great for us to hear, because as much as the governor's recent initiative, and again, is an incredible need and impacts families and the working poor tremendously, and I don't want to really put that down, but the truth is that for many of the people that we see in the shelters, they're really coming from kind of non-tenancy based types of situations. And particularly with the depopulation of shelters that we've seen because of the COVID, that it becomes, very concerning for us in terms of where do we go from here, And I think that I will say, that I can generally say that particularly Senator Crichton and the Housing Committee at the Senate have really been on top of a lot of these issues and looking at these things, and definitely including this population within their consideration. And a good sign of that, and I wanted to note it and thank you, that the supplemental budget that you approved in July for 2020 and 2021, that contained $5.8 million for permanent supportive housing. And while Governor Baker and administration and finance have yet to release this, we're still grateful that the Senate thought that permanent supportive housing was important. And in terms of trying to, think about this from a question, has Ways and Means, and probably I'm guessing in conversation with the Senate Housing Committee, given any other thought to these appropriations that the administration has yet to release, or on other ways perhaps that we might be able to increase permanent supportive housing as we move forward?
We are in regular conversations with A&F. There are a number, so that was a $1.1 billion, we call it the COVID-19 supplemental budget. Mm-hmm. Right. It was structured in such a way for us to most effectively and efficiently use federal dollars. The most effective and efficient use of federal dollars is so-called FEMA dollars, Federal Emergency Management Act dollars, because the Commonwealth is reimbursed 75 cents for every dollar we spent that's FEMA eligible. The second most effective and efficient use is using what we call CRF dollars, CARES Relief Fund dollars. That's a finite pot of money. FEMA is infinite. We have a finite amount of CARES Act. So we in the legislature have been very persistent in dogging the administration and getting the so-called earmarks and supplemental appropriations out the door. But to their credit, they are overwhelmed also with the fiscal year budget. They are making the most efficient use to ensure that we get anything that's FEMA eligible gets spent the right way, that come December 31st, when that CARES Act money is either spent or reverted, that we don't revert 1 penny to the federal government, that we utilize that entire appropriation here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we will continue to advocate alongside of you to get that money for the shelters out the door. And,
well, that's great to hear. That's great to hear, Mr. Chairman, because one of the genius behind that specific line is the fact that particularly FEMA and ESG dollars will not cover permanent supportive housing, and so you need to really apply the CRF. It was the one particular group that kind of got left out, even in terms of the incredible costs that they took on during the COVID crisis. Everything from adding staff or having to even bring on security in certain situations, any number of added costs of cleaning and different things. But beyond that, the way that the language was written, and I didn't write the language, the Senate Housing Committee did, and I thought it was brilliant because they wrote it in such a way was to cover the costs that were impacted by the crisis in the past fiscal year, but also moving forward into this year was to really look at this resource possibly as a way of providing alternatives in the midst of the COVID crisis to deal with the shortage that obviously we're seeing now. So any support in that area, we really appreciate very much. And again, as I say, it was in my mind, just again, we're very grateful that the support that the Housing Committee had provided as well. No, we appreciate that then. And I guess I should probably just wrap this up then, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for taking the time to come on with us today. And I'd have to say I'm grateful clearly for the commitment that you're making related to the most vulnerable. And I look forward to speaking with you in the future as we move forward. And I want to say on the other hand as well, if there's anything that we or our members can help you or assist you with in this process moving forward, I hope you won't hesitate to contact us and reach out to us as well. So with that, I just thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I got to say, I don't envy you, but I'm grateful that someone like you is in this position of leadership at this critical time.
Thank you, Joe, and to you and to all your members. Please know that the Senate Committee on Ways and Means door is always open, although you're not allowed to come through it now because the State House is closed. Our emails. We are here to work together on any and all issues that come to us in Senate Ways and Means. We have conversations with Senator Crichton as the chair of the Committee on Housing, and he's an incredible partner and brilliant young man on these issues. So we're all here to work together. We're all in the same boat. Thank you, Jeremy. I forgot, in the world of generalists, Joe, just to let you know, my next meeting at 11 o'clock is with Marty Meehan, president of UMass, because housing world upside down, public higher education is completely upside down with our dorms empty and remote learning and all this. So we're trying to navigate all these new issues that there's no playbook. It's not like back in, what did we do last time that we shut students out of our higher education system, So, but we're dealing with it, and we're lucky that there's lots of well-meaning, smart people in the Commonwealth like yourself and like Marty Meehan and his team and everyone. So thank you all.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got it. See ya. Bye-bye.
Take care now. Bye.